homelessness saved my life. Now, before I explain, allow me to take you on a brief trip through my life. I grew up in poverty. My parents divorced when I was 7, and my father rarely paid child support. My mom left California when I was 9 and moved to a little ski resort town in Colorado. Now, in the 1970s, women not only could not have a credit card, but they certainly could not have a mortgage without a husband to co-sign, and my mom clearly did not have a husband to co-sign. So when she finally did buy a house, it was condemned. Part of it was falling off the foundation, and she paid cash for it, $27,500. It's not turning.
There it goes.
Nope. The main part was built in 1903. It had no insulation. Instead, it had newspapers stuck to the wall. And the middle part was falling off the foundation, so we had to completely tear it off for a new foundation. And a lot of work needed to be done. And we did all of it. And we lived in this condemned house while we rebuilt it. But eventually we built it into a very beautiful home that was featured on maps of the town. I tell you all this to explain that I watched my mother grow from nothing into something. She had nothing more than a high school diploma, but she worked her way up from being a receptionist making $2.75 an hour to being an executive vice president on the board of directors and major stockholder of one of the largest international industrial construction companies in the world. I knew that if she accomplished what she did in her life, I could accomplish whatever I wanted in mine. And I believed I'd be successful. And I was. Kind of. I got married, divorced, and became a single mom as an undergraduate. But I did complete my BA, MA, and Ph.D. as a single mom. I received awards for teaching and scholarship during my doctoral program, all while coaching my son's soccer teams, taking him to hockey and martial arts, and volunteering in his elementary school classrooms. I went on to receive similar awards during my academic career. And by all accounts, I was considered a success. People would regularly tell me how amazing I was to have accomplished everything I accomplished given my circumstances. Single motherhood doesn't have to be a curse, it can be a blessing. Look at what I accomplished. Go me. I wore the mantle of Superwoman. My son is now a success in his own right. He earned his doctorate, and he is a certified chiropractor with advanced certification in chiropractic biophysics, and he owns his own clinic. I'm very proud. In 2016, I became my mother's legal medical caretaker. Her health had deteriorated. She could no longer take care of herself, and she could no longer live alone. So despite my academic success, I stepped off the tenure track, and I accepted a lecturer position with an annually renewable contract so that I didn't have the pressures of the tenure track and I could focus on taking care of her. It wasn't easy, but I persisted because I'm Superwoman, right? In January 2020, my mother was hospitalized. In February 2020, she was placed in home hospice. In March 2020, the pandemic shut everything down. In June 2020, my mother died. And in August 2020, my teaching contracts were canceled because of the pandemic. Suddenly, all of my greatest accomplishments became my biggest liabilities. I applied for lots and lots of jobs. I had unemployment and the pandemic unemployment extension lasted for a year, but I still applied for lots and lots of jobs. 918 over the 3 years that I was unemployed. And I didn't limit myself to academic jobs. In fact, I spread my wings very wide. I applied for office jobs, receptionist, secretary, office manager. I applied for jobs in accounting departments because I had worked in accounting to put myself through school. I applied for tutoring jobs. I applied for proofreading jobs. And out of those 3 years and 918 applications, I got a total of 4 interviews. 4. Now, I was diagnosed as clinically depressed when I was 13, back before anything remotely resembling pediatric or adolescent psychology actually existed. So I've dealt with it my whole life, but the inability to even get any responses on my applications took a toll. And I spiraled into a very, very dark place. I began to isolate. I stopped eating, maybe 1 meal a day. I slept all day and I was awake all night. I wouldn't go outside because I knew that people could tell just by looking at me that I was a complete and utter failure. I wouldn't even take the trash down except late at night for fear somebody might see me. In May 2023, with no way to prove that I could pay rent going forward, I lost my apartment. And I also lost almost everything I owned. I was able to put some things into storage, my clothes, my shoes, blankets, my dishes, my diplomas. But I lost all my furniture, all my cookware, all of my books, memories. And I literally walked away from life as I had known it and went to the single women's homeless intake shelter. All I could do was cry. I mean, I was supposed to be this successful woman, and there I was sitting in the single women's homeless intake shelter. All I could think was, what in the world did I ever do that was so bad that I deserved this? I was completely alone. I couldn't tell anybody I was in the homeless shelter because I couldn't take their judgment. I had enough shame of my own, I didn't need theirs too. I didn't even tell my son. I still haven't. The same day I went to the homeless shelter, I was placed in a permanent shelter in the same neighborhood where I used to live, which is great, except I didn't want to go outside, so it didn't matter that I knew my way around. But you know what I discovered? Homeless shelters have rules. Breakfast is served from 6 to 8 a.m., lunch is 12 to 2 p.m., and dinner is 6 to 8 p.m. If you don't make it down, you don't eat, because you're not allowed to bring in outside food or drink, not even water. You're supposed to be out of your bed by 9 o'clock in the morning so they can clean the rooms. Your room is supposed to be kept tidy, your bed is supposed to be made, and everything you own is supposed to fit inside a locker. Clearly not everyone complies with that one, but I do. No food or drink, no smoking or drugs or alcohol. We have to go through a metal detector walking in and out. And curfew is at 11 o'clock p.m. If you're not in your room by 11 o'clock when they do bed check, you lose your bed, which means you lose your spot in the shelter, which means you sleep outside. These rules are why so many people refuse to go into a shelter. But these rules saved my life. Before I went to the shelter, I had become incredibly unhealthy physically, emotionally, mentally, spiritually, because I was isolated, because I was spiraling down. The shelter forced me to adhere to the rules. I was initially placed on the 5th floor, and they had an elevator, which I used initially. And then I slowly started taking the stairs down. I took the elevator on, but the stairs down. I eventually started taking the stairs up, and after a couple of weeks, I could actually walk all 5 floors without stopping. That felt like a huge accomplishment. I also started eating, not breakfast, I typically don't eat breakfast, but I went down for coffee. And I slowly started interacting with other people, and I eventually made a couple of friends. My 3rd week in the shelter, I went to my first group meeting. And it was the first time I had admitted to anybody that I have a Ph.D., but that I also felt like a complete failure. I figured, who cares if anybody judges me? I've got nothing to lose at this point, right? But one woman looked at me and said, everybody in here is going through something. And you know what? She was right. So what if I have a Ph.D.? We're all one illness, one crisis, one missed paycheck away from homelessness. There was nothing special about me. The pandemic took its toll on a lot of people. And then the strangest thing happened. One of the young women looked at me and said, "You're a college professor?" And I said, "Yeah." She said, "I really want to go to college. Would you help me apply?" Now, I'm the type of person that tries to find the silver lining, but I was having a really hard time finding anything good about being in the shelter. And suddenly, here it was, an opportunity to be of service using my specific expertise. And pretty soon, I was helping women apply for jobs and create resumes and helping people. That's my passion. It always has been. It was my favorite part of teaching. Not the standing up in front of class lecturing part of teaching, but the one-on-one in my office with students part. And here I was getting that opportunity. And you know what I learned through all of this is that most women in a homeless shelter don't want to be there. But through a series of unexpected events, there they are. Most of us just need help to get back on our feet. There are a few who are happy to stay. I mean, it is 3 meals a day and a roof over your head and a bed to sleep in. Adulting not required, but the majority just need help getting back on their feet. And I needed help getting back on my feet, but there I was helping others get back on their feet. When I finally got my job in August, after 3 years of unemployment, I started applying for apartments. And I was routinely rejected simply because I had the voucher. And I started wondering, where does this stigma about homelessness come from? And so I'd like to talk about the 5 most common misperceptions that are not only untrue, but they actually harm those of us who are trying to move out of homelessness. The first is that people are just lazy and choose to be homeless. I didn't choose to be homeless. None of the women I interacted with chose to be homeless, but we ended up there through a series of events like eviction, lack of affordable housing, domestic violence, and a couple of cases mental illness. But not one of us chose to be homeless. And I certainly wasn't lazy. I applied for 918 different jobs. I spent hours every day sitting in front of my laptop applying for jobs. And so did most of the other women in the shelter. The homeless are addicts and alcoholics. I've been clean and sober for 35 years, coming up on 36 in May. Other women in the shelter were also clean and sober and regularly went to meetings. Some women simply chose not to indulge. Others found it morally reprehensible. Out of my 7 months in the shelter, only a very small handful of women engaged in any behavior like that, and most of them just smoked some weed. Considering there are 80 beds in the shelter and that I watched women come and go for 7 months, a handful is a pretty small percentage. Homeless people should just get a job. I applied for 918 jobs. Just getting a job isn't as easy as it sounds. Nobody wanted me because of my age, my experience, my degrees. People said, don't put your Ph.D. on your resume. I didn't. But when your last 25 years of work history is college and university teaching, people just know that you have a Ph.D. I was deemed either overqualified or underqualified or too old or too smart or whatever. The other problem is the available jobs that are out there, and there are many, are incredibly low-wage jobs, which puts homeless people into a catch-22. It's not enough to actually afford to pay rent or the initial money that you have to spend to get an apartment, but it's too much to qualify for food stamps or any of the other forms of assistance that would actually help us get back on our feet. So just getting a job isn't what people think it is. There are plenty of services for the homeless, and there are. The problem is, almost all of them are emergency services, food banks, shelters. We need to actually address the larger systemic issues. Lack of affordable housing, criminalization of homelessness, stigmatization of homelessness, the things that actually stop us from being able to stand on our own 2 feet. Homelessness is a moral failing. Our society sees homelessness as a moral failing. We believe that if somebody is homeless, they must have made bad choices. The truth is, it's actually a societal failing. A recent article in the American Medical Association Journal of Ethics argued that homelessness is a result of society's choices that promote inequity. It continues, the scale of homelessness in the most powerful and wealthy country on earth demonstrates that mass homelessness is a social problem resulting from many choices society has made over time. And the article closes by saying responding robustly to remove structural causes of homelessness is a matter of justice. Homelessness saved my life.